Dr. Arvind, you can hear me? Arvind, can you hear me?
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, Arvind.
Ma'am, am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you are. We'll wait for a while. Some more participants have to come.
Okay, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Arvind, start.
Ma'am. Okay, ma'am. I'll start, ma'am.
Yes.
Good morning. My patient, Mrs. ABC, 42-year-old woman, hailing from Vyasarpadi with primary school education, a right-handed individual who was a tailor by occupation, who is currently unemployed. The attender was a son and reliability fair, came with complaints of palpitations for the past 10 years and breathlessness for the past 1.5 years. History of presenting illness. Mrs. ABC was apparently normal until 10 years ago when she started developing palpitations on exertion, which she felt as fast, irregular heartbeats, which was lasting around 5 minutes and was relieved within few minutes of rest. Recently, for the past 1.5 years, the palpitations were associated with breathing difficulty, and it is not associated with sweating, nausea, vomiting, or loss of consciousness, and it is relieved with rest. And for the past 1 week, symptoms worsened, and it is also present during the rest. Breathlessness, which she first noticed during an episode of palpitation while climbing a flight of stairs 1.5 years back, and it was relieved on rest. And only 1 year back, there was sudden worsening of breathlessness, which was present even at rest, for which she was taken to a hospital, was evaluated, and given medications, after which the symptoms subsided, but she was on poor drug compliance. For the next 6 months, her symptoms gradually progressed, and the patient found it difficult to climb stairs, uh, which she was able to do before and had to take frequent breaks in between. And for the past 3 to 4 months, patient notices to have sudden awakenings from sleep due to breathlessness, and it gets relieved within 5 to 10 minutes once the patient sits up or takes a walk, after which she returns to sleep. And since the past 1 week, a patient's symptoms worsened. She developed breathlessness even at rest and associated with orthopnea, for which she was admitted now. On further questioning, since past 4 years, patient notices to have fatigue, which is insidious in onset and gradually progressive. There's no history of chest pain, no history of lower limb swelling, no history of cough with expectoration, fever, difficulty in swallowing, change in voice. There's no history of age or seasonal variation of breathing difficulty, no history of weakness of limbs, claudication pain, or hematuria. Past history, there's no history of swelling of joints, skin manifestations, fever, or sore throat. No history of any prophylaxis taken, no history of recurrent lower respiratory tract infections, no history of cerebrovascular events. There's history of sudden onset breathlessness, that is 1.5 years back, for which she was evaluated in MMC and was diagnosed with a heart disease and was started on anticoagulants and diuretics. Yes, but the patient had poor drug complaints and stopped treatment since last December. There's no history of systemic hypertension, diabetes mellitus, tuberculosis, or ischemic heart disease. Personal history: patient not a smoker or alcoholic, normal bowel and bladder habits, and reduced sleep for the past 1 year. Family history: she is the second of third child born out of non-consanguineous marriage. She's married with one child. There's no similar illness in the parents or siblings. Summary: 42-year-old female presented with progressive palpitations, progressed from class 2 to class 4 NOHA for the past 10 years, and easy fatigability for the past 4 years, and dyspnea for the past 1.5 years, which is associated with PND for the past 3 to 4 months, and which worsened in the past week.
Okay, Arvind. So, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Am I audible? Yes, Arvind, can you hear me? Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Ma'am?
Arvind, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, okay. So looking at your summary, let's go back to your summary. Your patient has progressive palpitations for the past 10 years.
Yes, ma'am.
Along with EC fatigability. That's how the problem started for her.
Yes, ma'am.
What, according to you, does this palpitation indicate?
Ma'am, palpitations can be due to a change in rate or the rhythm or the force of contracture, ma'am. So, palpitations which is of a long history is probably due to a long-standing change in the chamber. I mean, probably due to the chamber enlargement, ma'am.
Chamber enlargement leading to a volume overloaded condition. Is that what?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So according to you, this is the patient is able to feel the contraction of the volume overloaded heart. Okay. Is there any other possibility besides this? With regard to palpitation,
high output
any
states,
other possibility?
High output states can also cause palpitations, ma'am. Increased heart rate can cause palpitations. Anemia and thyrotoxic cases can precipitate palpitations.
Okay, let's look at it like this.
Yes,
if the patient were to feel the heartbeat at all points of time, it's to do with volume overloaded conditions, like for example, MR, AR, or TR. Okay, whereas if it comes in paroxysms, it could be regular or irregular. Then it could be arrhythmogenic. isn't it?
Yes,
So
ma'am.
your patient has had a long history, nearly 10 years. So let's look at it from a volume overload point of view. All right. Okay. Now coming to fatigue. What is your concept about fatigue for your patient? How do you explain it?
Fatigue can be because of mainly because of two events. One is because of decreased cardiac output, and the other one is because of pulmonary hypertension.
Okay. Let's call this as exertional fatigue, Arvind, because generally reduction in cardiac output patients are not seen outside. We see them only in intensive care, isn't it? So this is an exertional fatigue. And generally when we say exertional fatigue, we call it as a fixed cardiac output and not as a low cardiac output. A fixed cardiac output would mean when the patient were to exert, the necessary increase in cardiac output is not achieved. Can you give me a few examples when that happens?
Uh, like severe systemic hypertension.
Any classical valvular heart disease which gives rise to a fixed cardiac output? Yes, I can make out in the chat box. Somebody says aortic stenosis. Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Any others besides? Yes, classically aortic stenosis is associated with fatigue. You are correct. Anything else?
Mitral
How about
regurgitation.
Hokum?
No?
How about Hokum? Anywhere, wherever there is a outlet obstruction, a fixed obstruction, the patient will find it difficult to do any activity because the muscles will require more vascular supply and blood supply, wherein the heart is unable to meet the demand, isn't it? And what you said about pulmonary hypertension is very correct, especially severe hypertension will not be able to increase the cardiac output as required. Similarly, even MR, why should MR be unable to increase the output?
The patient has almost equal forward cardiac output and backward cardiac output, ma'am.
Exactly. So it is unlikely the patient is able to increase the output. So now we have explained your palpitation and fatigue in these scenarios. The next symptom that you talked about was dyspnea. That was fairly recent within the last 1.5 years, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
And now tell me, with regard to this dyspnea, the patient has presented to you at this point of time with grade 4 dyspnea, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, along with orthopnea.
Yes, ma'am.
And I think you also talked about some episode of possible PND.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell me the difference between both? What is orthopnea and what is PND?
Ma'am, PND usually occurs at the earlier stages of pulmonary pulmonary venous hypertension, ma'am.
Yes. Do you know
PND,
the wedge pressure? Do you know the wedge pressure at which point of time a patient might experience a PND? In other words, the left atrial pressure.
it's
Okay, it's around 18 millimeters of mercury, wherein the patient might experience a PND episode. Do you know how to describe this episode?
ma'am, sudden awakening from sleep, ma'am. Patient gasp for breath, and and the patient sits up in an erect posture or tries to walk for a few minutes and tries to catch air from the window, and it is relieved within 5 to 10 to 15 minutes, after which the patient returns to sleep normally.
Yes. So this actually takes a while, almost 15 to 20 minutes for it to subside on its own. So it's almost talked of like a sudden exercise during sleep. Why should you say that? Because your respiratory center is lagging behind and the patient suddenly wakes up from sleep with sudden dyspnea. Okay, because the heart rate goes up and the pulmonary wedge pressure suddenly jumps up. So this is an early indication of which side failure?
Left heart failure.
Left heart failure. All right. Unlike orthopnea, it is very straining to the patient. The patient will find orthopnea is something the patient gets relieved immediately on sitting up, whereas PND takes some time to settle. But it does not occur as many times as an orthopnea episode would be. Okay. So in orthopnea, what do you think is the wedge pressure? How much should the pressure raise for it to result in orthopnea?
Then 25.
Yes, very good. 25 millimeters of mercury, which is nothing but the oncotic pressure within the vessels. So when the hydrostatic pressure goes beyond 25 millimeters of mercury, patient will experience fluid within the alveoli. Whereas PND is nothing but interstitial edema.
Yes.
Fine. So in both the situations, why does dyspnea occur? How do you describe the dyspnea? It is to do with the reduction in compliance of the lungs because of stiffness due to fluid. Hence, there is a difference between perfusion and
Yes. Ventilation mismatch.
yes, there is a mismatch. That is why. Do you know what is bendopnea? This is a term that has come up recently. Have you heard of it?
It's severe when there is severe LV dysfunction and the patient even slightly bends, it causes dyspnea.
Very good. Yes. So that itself will cause an increased venous return, wherein the patient will find that there is increasing dyspnea. In orthopnea, nearly about 500 ml of blood will rush back on lying down. Fine. Okay. So with regard to classification, what is the classification that you know of in dyspnea? With regard to dyspnea or any other cardiac symptoms?
NYHA can be used for all dyspnea, palpitation, fatigue, and angina
Yes.
in a
Yes.
patient with
Yes.
cardiac illness. Ma'am.
Yes.
The
Do you know of
other one
any
is,
other classification?
yes, ma'am. Canadian classification can be used for angina, ma'am.
Correct.
And Goldman metabolic scale can be used for angina, the oxygen consumption.
Yes. Do you know the difference between the two, NIHA and Goldman classification, and which is preferred?
Like it's almost like say all 4 classes are the same, ma'am. There is no limitation in class 1 and limitation at rest in class 4, but I'm not sure of the.
Okay. Is there any disadvantage of NIHA classification, which is sort of satisfied by the Goldman certification? Okay, let me say it out. In NIHA, the way that we classify is a very subjective way. Each observer might have a different assumption from the classification. And whereas in Goldman, it is nothing but a specific activity scale with regard to the METs, metabolic equivalent. So with our activity, for example, lying down has only 1 MET. Taking a bath will take 3 METs. Staircase would have about 5 to 5.5 METs. So with that in mind, this is more of an objective way of classifying. So each stage will have a certain level of METs. For example, stage 1 will be above 7 METs and stage 4 will be less than 2 METs. So it's a much better way of classifying. It is more objective and it can be reproduced by any examiner who were to come. So this awareness should be there by the students. Okay, so now you have talked about this dyspnea, which has been there for the last 1.5 years, isn't it? And which has become worse now along with orthopnea and PND. Fine. And the next, and I think you have not mentioned about syncope. Why is that? I didn't find a negative history of syncope. What is it that we worry about syncope? If in case it's a negative history, if it's not there, what is it that you're ruling out?
Aortic stenosis.
Okay, is there a better way of putting it?
Hmm?
Is there a different way of putting it? One is outlet obstruction, like what you said, one of the reasons being aortic stenosis. Any other reasons for syncope?
Any decreased cardiac output?
Yes, due to
failure. Due to failure.
some another cardiac reason. One is outlet obstruction, the other being arrhythmias. Okay, so when you have ruled out syncope, and like you said, we are ruling out an obstructive, outlet obstructive lesion in our case, and any sudden arrhythmia which might have caused a loss of consciousness. Can you give me an example of an arrhythmia that might do so?
Torsades, VT.
Ventricular tachycardia. Yes. Okay. So now you have your patient who has now come to us for exacerbation of dyspnea, and with treatment it has improved. So with all this in mind, what do you think is the valve that is involved here?
With complaints of palpitations and the patient admits to have irregular, she feels of irregular heartbeats. Probably the patient would guess the patient will be in atrial fibrillation, and so the valve would be a mitral valve involvement, ma'am. And with
Do you think
the
she would have had?
palpitations being the predominant, ma'am.
Yes, please continue. Sorry.
And with palpitation being the predominant symptom, It's more of a regurgitant lesion rather than a stenotic lesion.
All right. So she's had a long-standing palpitation. So we considered a regurgitant valvular lesion along with fatigue overlay, which also supports that. And finally, she ends with dyspnea, wherein you might still consider an obstructive lesion perhaps coming into the picture along with a regurgitant lesion. That is a possibility, isn't it? So if it is a regurgitant lesion, which valve do you think is affected? Which possible valve is
with
here?
a long history, yes, ma'am. With long history, mitral valve would be the first DD, ma'am. Aortic involvement usually has a shorter history.
Do you think so? Because even an aortic valvular lesion, let it be an AS or an AR, will also have a very long-term latency, or we call it as a very long latency. But once the symptoms set in, then it's a downhill course for all the regurgitant, that is MR, AR, along with the AS also thrown in. All three lesions will have a long latency, but very short symptomatic period once the symptoms start. Unlike in MS. MS has a very short latency. Why is that?
The increase in LA pressure gets transmitted.
Yes. Yes. To the pulmonary circulation.
Yes, ma'am.
Unlike the other valves, wherein the LV compensates.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So our patient possibly had a long-term regurgitant lesion. It could be a aortic or a mitral. We don't know that. But perhaps because later, the way that you described, the palpitations have become more episodic, perhaps an arrhythmia set in, which worsened the picture. Shall we look at it from that point of view?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, please continue with your examination findings.
General examination. Patient was conscious, afebrile, moderately built and nourished with a BMI of 26.1. There's no pallor, cyanosis, clubbing, pale edema or jaundice. There's no neck swelling, and there's no markers of congenital heart disease. Vitals, pulse was 88 per minute, irregularly irregular, with varying volume, no special character, palpable in all peripheral vessels, with a pulse deficit of 8, with no radiofemoral delay. Respiratory rate 15 per minute, regular abdominal thoracic type. Blood pressure, average of 3 blood pressures was measured from the right upper limb with patient in sitting posture. It was 124 about 80 millimeters of mercury. Left upper limb BP was 120 over 80 millimeters of mercury. Right lower limb BP and left lower limb BP was 130 millimeters of mercury systolic. JVP was seen 5 centimeters above the sternal border. Abdominal jugular reflex was present, and temperature is 98 Fahrenheit. CVS examination.
1 minute, Arvind. 1 minute, Arvind. Let's go back to the previous slide. Yes, with regard to the JVP, you have mentioned here that it is 5 centimeters above the sternal border.
Yes, ma'am.
So according to you, is this a raised JVP?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Once you feel that the JVP is raised, you must also comment about the waveforms, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So what is your comment?
The patient was in atrial fibrillation, so there is no A wave prominence.
Okay, there's an absence of A wave. Then any other wave that you got to see? Which other waves are there, Arvind?
A
In a
wave.
JVP?
A wave
Yes.
is A followed by C wave because of the tricuspid ballooning and the X descent, followed by V wave because of the venous filling and Y descent.
Okay. So now that you've told me A is absent, what are the other possible abnormalities in a JVP with an underlying cardiac failure with regard to the waveforms. What will happen to the V wave? Supposing there is a right heart failure, which has led on to the JVP being raised, what will happen to the V wave?
Be a prominent V wave.
Definitely it will be normally A wave is the predominant wave
Yes, ma'am.
in a normal JVP. But once
Yes.
pulmonary hypertension sets in, A wave becomes more prominent. But in your case, because of atrial fibrillation, there is an absence of A wave. But once TR sets in, then C and the V will combine together and form a large V wave, isn't it? So
Yes,
you're
ma'am.
supposed to comment on that in case it is there or not. Fine. Then there is another word here, abdominojugular reflux. Reflux, it is UX. Okay, reflux. Once a patient is in failure, actually there is no need to comment on the abdominojugular reflux. It's mainly meant for incipient failure. All right. Okay, please continue.
Cardiovascular system examination, inspection. There's no chest wall asymmetry, no kyphosis, scoliosis. Apical impulse could not be visualized. Pulsations seen over the pulmonary area. No epigastric or parasternal pulsations. No dilated veins. No scars of previous surgery. Palpation. Apical impulse is felt in the left sixth intercostal space, 2.5 centimeters lateral to the midclavicular line, and is hyperdynamic in character. It's not associated with thrill. Best felt in the left lateral portion with breath held in expiration. Trachea is central in position. There's a palpable P2 felt in the left second intercostal space. Grade 2 left parasternal heave is present. The epigastric pulsation felt with the tip of the finger. Percussion. The left heart border corresponds to the apex beat in the left sixth intercostal space, 3 centimeter lateral to the midclavicular line. Right heart border is 2 centimeter lateral to the right sternal hedge, and there's a dullness over the left second intercostal space. Auscultation for the mitral area, S1 with varying intensity and a loud second heart sound is heard. There's high-pitched, soft-blowing pansystolic murmur of grade 3 intensity, which is best heard with the diaphragm of the stethoscope in left lateral portion of the patient and at the height of expiration with radiation to left axillary. There is also a low-pitched, rough rumbling mid-diastolic murmur of grade 3 intensity, best heard with the bell of stethoscope in the left lateral portion at the height of expiration with no radiation. The tricuspid area, S1, S2 can be heard, no murmur. Pulmonary area, the S1 is loud and second heart sound. S1 is heard and a loud second heart sound with very narrow split and no murmur. Aortic area, S1, S2 heard and no murmur.
Okay, let me hold you here for a minute.
Yes,
Whenever you talk about the mitral area findings, it's best to just talk about the S1 alone and not comment too much about the second heart sound. Okay, so you've written here S1 with varying intensity, and there is a high-pitched blowing murmur, which is suggestive of a which valvular lesion?
Regurgitant, mitral regurgitation.
Mitral regurgitant. Okay, and similarly, you've also found an MDM, which is indicative of a
Stenotic lesion.
stenotic mitral valvular stenotic lesion.
Yes.
Similarly, when you come to the pulmonary area, you have commented about the loud P2 here, but whenever you talk about the base of the heart, say as S1, S2 heard, S2 is split and moving with respiration, and then you talk about the second heart sound if it is loud, and then you talk about whether the split is narrow or wide. That is the way a PG is to present. Okay, so here you should have said the second heart sound is split, and the second component, that is P2, is loud, and the split, according to you now that you've said, I think you said it is narrow. The split is narrow. Am I right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, please continue.
Examination of other systems. Respiratory system, normal vesicular breath sounds and no added sounds. Abdomen examination, soft, non-tender and no megaly. Central nervous system examination, there's no focal neurological deficit. Diagnosis, Case of acquired heart disease, probably rheumatic in origin, involving the mitral valve in the form of regurgitation with stenosis, with the patient in atrial fibrillation, with features of pulmonary hypertension, and no signs of infective endocarditis, and patient in congestive cardiac failure.
All right, couple of things here, Arvind. In the diagnosis, when you
Yes,
have talked about acquired disease involving the mitral valve in the form of regurgitation and stenosis, and you mention atrial fibrillation, with atrial fibrillation, you must also talk about the ventricular rate. What, according to you,
Yes,
is the ventricular rate here? Is it controlled or rapid?
Yes, it's controlled ventricular rate now.
Okay, so you must include that.
Yes,
All right, with pulmonary hypertension and no signs of infective endocarditis and CCF. What is the significance of this atrial fibrillation here, Arvind? In the course of things, what is the significance of atrial fibrillation? How does it worsen the disease? Describe it to me. Arvind, can you come?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. There is with MR, there is already increased. With MR already there is a decreased preload, ma'am. Which worsens the LA enlargement.
No, let's talk about it from this way. In atrial fibrillation, there is a high heart rate, isn't it?
Yes,
The
yes,
resultant heart rate, ventricular rate, is generally very high. Atrium will beat at a let's say around a beat of 300 beats, and the ventricle will finally, the pulse that we finally feel will be around 150, 160 even sometimes, right? So with such a big heart rate, what is going to happen? What is the physiology that is going to happen? Why does it worsen the cardiac failure? Can you explain to me?
There is.
Why do we bother so much about the heart rate and we want to control the ventricular rate here?
Coronary perfusion occurs during diastole. When tachycardia, there is decreased diastolic time, so it worsens the failure.
Okay, it has nothing to do with coronary perfusion, but you're right about the diastolic period. Always remember, whenever at a higher rates, the diastolic period is affected much more than the systolic period. So when there is a very short RR interval, there is very less time for the blood to empty out from the atrium to the ventricle, hence increasing the gradient. All right, let it be MS or MR. More so with MS, because MS is by far the commoner lesion wherein AF results. So when this gradient increases, there is spillover into the pulmonary circulation. Hence, this atrial fibrillation will precipitate cardiac failure, left heart failure. Then there is one more reason. What do you mean by an atrial kick being lost?
At the end diastolic.
How much is the contribution of the output? How much is the contribution of the atria for the ventricular filling, Arvind?
70% is because of passive filling, and the rest 30 is because of the atrial contraction.
Yes, very good. So 20 to 30% is by the atrium. So if that is lost, what is going to happen? The gradient is again going to jump. So you do not want atrial fibrillation here at all, because your whatever cardiac failure underlying was there is going to become manifold. And the need of the hour is to immediately control the ventricular rate. So atrial fibrillation is a very significant event. Can you tell me some other events which can jumpstart or increase the failure in a patient who's already compensated for?
Anemia.
Yes. Yes.
Patient with severe systemic hypertension.
Okay. Any physiological event?
Like pregnancy.
Okay. In your patient, did you mention with regard to her pregnancy as to what happened during the 3 trimesters? Was it uneventful?
Um, yes, ma'am. Trimesters were uneventful, but the labor was assisted forced delivery. Ma'am.
At what age was it? Her pregnancy. Okay. Any other
Not sure.
precipitating factors, Arvind? How about common infection? Any type of infection, respiratory or viral? Yes, anything.
Yes.
All this can decompensate. Of course, infective endocarditis is a separate entity altogether. So any type of arrhythmia, one is atrial fibrillation, any supraventricular arrhythmia, even VT. Then anything else? These are all common things that we keep finding in the wards. Some electrolyte imbalances. Give me some electrolyte imbalances, perhaps to the drugs that we are giving to these
Hypocalcemia
patients.
decreases.
Hypokalemia.
Decreases.
Hypokalemia,
Calcium.
secondary to diuretics, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So fine. So coming back to your diagnosis, what do you think with regard to the findings is the intensity, that is the severity of the lesions with regard to regurgitation, mitral MR or MS? How does one decide about the severity of MR clinically?
MR severity is associated with, and there is an S3 gallop in
Which S3?
with
RVS3?
LVS3. Ma'am.
Yes, so say so. LVS3, then?
LVS3. And also murmur is associated with systolic thrill. Ma'am.
Correct.
And also flow MDM across the mitral valve because of severe regurgitation.
Yes. Is this MDM as rough as your pathological MS MDM, or is there a difference? Quality of the murmur? It is much softer. Okay. It's more of mid diastole and it is softer. Then anything else? Any other features of severity of MR? Anything to do with the size of the heart?
LV enlargement.
Yes.
LV enlargement.
Yes. So enlarged heart and a heart which has developed a pulmonary hypertension as well, which, like we talked about earlier, is a late event. It does not happen early as in MS. All right. So in your case, do you think this patient has a significant MR?
Yes, ma'am. The patient has moderate, at least moderate MR.
How?
Ma'am?
By which findings?
And apical impulse is shifted down and out.
Good. Yes.
LV enlargement. And the MDM be flow MDM or it could be organic stenotic MDM.
You feel it's an organic stenotic lesion or is it a flow murmur? The MDM that you heard. It's a fairly long
organic,
MDM.
lesion MDM.
Sir, yes. So you cannot include that. So you've said large, fairly enlarged LV. It's down and out in the 6th space. Then what about the character of the apex?
Yes, it is hyperdynamic. So,
hyperdynamic. All right. Then can you give me some features which would support mitral stenosis here? Because you said the mitral stenosis in your diagnosis. What are the features?
Yes, ma'am.
Murmur, MDM. Yes.
Murmur,
yes. Then?
And pulmonary hypertension can be because of both.
Yes, a developing or a development of a pulmonary arterial hypertension with a narrow split second heart sound is definite evidence of MS. Whereas an MR also can result in the same, but much later. In the case of MR, you will find one characteristic difference being that the second heart sound will be widely split. Please remember, this is one finding That is going to help you decide whenever there is multivalvular disease, because every other finding will confuse you because it can be accounted for by another lesion. But here, the second heart sound being split and being wide is a definitive point for a significant MR in a combined MS and MR. When there is pulmonary arterial hypertension in MS alone, the second heart sound will be closely split. Okay, like in your patient. Any other feature that would support a significant MS in your case, besides the MDM and a narrowly split second heart sound with a P2 being loud and a varying S1, what other feature would tell you that there is a significant MS sitting here? The development of an RV failure, if at all, or the development of an atrial fibrillation, the presence of an atrial fibrillation itself would wager more for an MS than an MR. So basically an event of right-sided, that is right-sided pressure overload or right-sided development failure itself says more for MS than for MR. Okay, so we'll keep all this in mind. You have some investigations. Shall we go into it?
Yes, ma'am. This was the ECG of the patient at the time of admission. Ma'am,
Yes.
am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, yes. Tell me the findings, please.
Showing irregular RR interval, features of atrial fibrillation with rapid ventricular rate. It's normal axis. There's no evidence of ventricular hypertrophy.
All right. You have an X-ray?
Yes, ma'am. X-ray was taken at the time of admission, ma'am. Showing increased bronchovascular markings from the hilar area, suggestive of back wing appearance, and there's a straightening of the left heart border, and also there's cardiomegaly, enlarged left ventricle. There's also splaying of carina.
Good. Splaying of carina. What is the normal angle?
Less than 17.
Okay.
Less
Any
than
other features?
There's also a double contour, suggestive of right atrial enlargement.
Pardon? Double contour suggestive of left atrial enlargement. Shadow within a shadow.
Left atrial enlargement.
Yes.
Yes,
could you quickly tell me the structures on the left side of the heart?
The aortic knuckle, followed by the pulmonary bay, followed by the left atrial appendage, followed by left ventricle.
All right. So the straightening happens due to?
Pulmonary hypertension causes the enlargement and straightening of the pulmonary bay.
Bay, yes.
The second is because of the LA enlargement, the LA appendage hypertrophy.
All right. If you want to see the right ventricular, whether it is enlarged, what would you want to do? Where is the right ventricle here?
In lateral view, there is the retrosternal windows occluded.
Good. So the retrosternal space will get occluded, wherein you must also comment about the apex here, whether it is an LV type or a RV type. Okay. Okay. Coming to the lungs, you were talking about increasing pulmonary venous congestion. Can you categorize the various stages of venous congestion for us?
Yes, ma'am. It's 3 grades. Grade 1 is the redistribution of the vascular to the upper lobes. There is cephalization of bronchovascular markings.
Along with
and grade 2 is
along with the wedge pressure.
Yes, ma'am. Chronic, it is
normal wedge
12
pressure
to 15.
is? Yes.
Ma'am, 12, ma'am, less than 12.
Yes. So between 12 to 17 is equalization and cephalization, what you just described. Okay. Next.
And it is followed by the interstitial edema and peribronchial cuffing. and also curly A and B lines, ma'am. It is around 15 to 25
Yes.
millimeters.
And that's the stage
Then
when
the
PND, that's the stage when PND occurs. All right. Okay.
yes. Then it is followed by the airspace opacities in fluid industry alveoli, which is about 25 millimeters of mercury.
Yes. Is there any sign that is described at that point?
Yes, ma'am. Butterfly or bat wing appearance.
Correct. Once the development of pulmonary arterial hypertension occurs, what are the changes that you get to see in the lung fields?
There is pruning.
Yes, where?
I mean, the periphery, in the peripheries.
Okay. If you divide the lungs into three parts by vertical lines, equal parts, the lateral 1/3 will be oligemic. Okay. In case of pulmonary arterial hypertension. Once the arterial hypertension develops, Arvind, what are the changes in the symptoms that will happen?
The left heart symptoms improve, ma'am. The patient improves. The left heart symptoms improve,
Correct.
and the patient develops right heart symptoms.
At the cost of right heart symptoms. All right. Do you have anything else to show us?
The echo of the echo showing. I'll just show you the videos of this.
Read out the findings, please.
Yes, ma'am. The patient, tachycardia was noted during the study with anterior mitral leaflet and posterior mitral leaflet thickened, and there's AML doming. There's restricted a mitral valve phase of 1.6 centimeter square with a moderate MR with eccentric jet, with the left atrial dilated severely, no LV or LA clot, with a TRPG of 55 millimeters of mercury, and MV mean gradient of 14 and max pressure gradient of 28 millimeters of mercury. There's severe TR. There's RA-RB dilatation with the severe RB dysfunction, a TAPSE of 0.9 centimeter and ITU velocity of 1.1 millimeters per second with an EF of 48%.
All right. So from these findings, before we go into the pictures, what is your understanding about what we discussed earlier? Does it fit into your echo findings? What is the severity of MS here?
Mild MS.
What is the mean pressure gradient?
Ma'am?
Mitral
By
valve?
mean pressure gradient, it is yes, ma'am. It is severe, ma'am. In case of 14, it is severe, ma'am.
Fine. And what is the TRPG?
Less than
Tell you.
TRPG of more than 35 is suggestive of pulmonary hypertension, ma'am.
Yes. What is the normal pressure in the pulmonary circulation? What is the normal systolic pressure?
15 to 30.
Yes, around 25. So anything
Yes, ma'am.
that is beyond 30 is considered as moderate, and anything beyond 50 millimeters of mercury is considered as severe. So how is it that TRPG gives you an indication of the pulmonary arterial pressure, Arvind? Hello?
Yes, ma'am. There's increased regurgitant flow because of the increased afterload
No, it's as
across
simple
the
as,
tricuspid.
it's quite actually simple because the pressure by which the TR jet goes into the left atrium, into the right atrium from the right ventricle is nothing but a reflection of the RV systolic pressure, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello. Yes. So when you
Yes, ma'am.
categorize TRPG in terms of millimeters of mercury, that along with the right
Yes,
atrial
ma'am.
pressure, which is invariably only 0 to 5, will give you indirectly the pressure in the pulmonary circulation.
Yes, ma'am.
It's very simple. Fine. So our patient has severe pulmonary arterial hypertension because it has exceeded 50. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Fine.
Yes, ma'am.
And the other chambers that have enlarged here are the left atrium. Left ventricle is not mentioned here, but the right atrium and the right
Yes, ma'am.
ventricle are definitely dilated, indicative of right-sided heart involvement.
Heart rate. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Also, there is a mention here of a moderate MR, which is a eccentric jet. All right.
Yes, ma'am.
We should also talk about, besides rheumatic disease, there are other types of MR as well. We'll come to it in the end. Because why I mentioned it here is, there is a sentence here which says there is an eccentric jet. When we look at the pictures, we will understand that most of the time, whenever rheumatic heart disease develops with resultant MR, the Doppler will pick up the regurgitant jet, which will follow very eccentrically. You won't be able to see it very clearly, unlike other types of MR, for example, functional MR or annular MR, wherein you'll see the jet right in the center of the chamber. All right. So then what else is seen here? So I think we have come to the conclusion that 3 chambers, that is left atrium, right atrium, and right ventricle, all 3 are dilated. There is severe pulmonary artery hypertension. There is significant MR and significant MS.
Yes, ma'am.
Fine. So with
Yes,
this in mind, we now realize what we discussed originally, that when there is underlying MR, long-term MR, like in your patient, for her, she's had a long latency without any symptoms. But then when the symptoms did start about 1.5 years or 2 earlier, possibly MS has contributed to the dyspnea along with the atrial fibrillation,
Yes, ma'am.
thus resulting in pulmonary arterial hypertension and right-sided involvement. All right. Please remember that MR is quite common in the earlier years. The incidence of MS takes over, becomes much higher after the second decade. Why so? After carditis in rheumatic fever, which is the commonest lesion soon after carditis, within the first adolescent years, when rheumatic fever happens, beyond that, which lesion generally is seen sooner due to carditis?
I'm not sure, ma'am. Stenotic.
Okay, whenever there is carditis due to rheumatic fever, rheumatic carditis, mitral regurgitation is the valve to worry over, because if the patient might even go into congestive cardiac failure. Fine. So the resultant lesion, if at all there is, will be mitral regurgitation. But MS will occur much later because of slow, very slow and less active carditis, but it will slowly take over. The incidence will be much higher of MS in later years. All right. Whereas MR is indicative of very active and recurrent carditis in the earlier years. So our patient has had MS in the later years, along with development of pulmonary arterial hypertension very early, once the MS is started, along with the fibrillation. Okay, we'll have a quick look at the echo pictures so that we can discuss the predominant findings there. It's easier to remember when you look at the pictures. That is why we are bringing it in. Okay, just show us quickly, please.
Yes, ma'am. This is the parasternal long axis view, ma'am. You can see dilated LA,
Play the video,
and dilated
please.
RV.
Play the video.
Yes, ma'am. It's playing now. Yes, ma'am. Can you see, ma'am? It's actually playing.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Describe.
There's a LA, so dilated LV, and dilated RV, ma'am. And also the both anterior and posterior mitral leaflets both are seen thickened, and there is also a doming of the anterior mitral leaflet, ma'am, along with the restricted mobility in the PML.
Why should doming occur,
This is
Arvind?
the
1 minute. Go back to
Ma'am,
that
the
picture,
free
please.
edge of the, yes, ma'am. The free edge of the valve is actually involved more commonly, and it is attached to the cusp, ma'am. The body of the cusp is actually mobile, and as there is increase in LHR, the in mitral leaflet domain.
Okay, let me go back to that, please. Okay, you are right. Because the pathology in rheumatic heart disease starts in the edge of the cusp and the commissures. That is the area which is going to be stuck together first. When there is increasing gradient across the mitral valve and increasing pressure, and suddenly the valve has to snap open, what happens is there is a buckling, just like how a wind would catch a sail. The same way, the buckling will lead to a sudden high-pitched opening snap. Can you get opening snap in other conditions as well, Arvind, other than MS? For the same
Opening
reason,
snap is
sudden
specific
increased
for
flow.
opening snap is specific for MS.
No, wherever you find there is a sudden increased flow, let it be let's say a large VSD or an ASD across the right side. Okay, even tricuspid stenosis. Fine. These are all the other areas where you might get opening snaps. You must remember that. Fine. Then why do you get, in this picture itself, you can explain to me why you get a loud S1 in MS.
Because of the increased LA pressure gradient, the valve opens very, I mean, there's wide opening of the valve from which it, during the ventricular systole, there is increased duration, increased distance the valve covers during closure.
Yes, by the end of diastole, the LV finds that the cusp mitral valve is still open and having been thickened already. It is a thick valve, please remember that. Along with that fact that it has a long excursion to go before it closes. That produces the increased sound. Now tell me if you can have other conditions where S1 can be loud other than mitral stenosis.
Any high output states and even in tachycardia, short PR interval, S1 can be loud.
Good.
Mm.
And if S1 is not loud, if it is not loud in MS, what is the inference?
Valve. It can be because of the calcified valve, or
Correct.
also when MS is along with associated with an MR.
Correct.
And there's congenital MS. There is soft S1.
Even if you have an underlying, let's say, dysfunction, if there is an acute MI, let's say, and the LV is unable to act well, even then you might find that your S1 will not be as loud. Or if there is a rotation of the heart, why should you get a rotation in MS? What type of rotation is that?
Anti-clockwise rotation due to right ventricular and
Clockwise or anti-clockwise?
Anti-clockwise.
How do you decide if it is clockwise or anti-clockwise? Pardon, it is clockwise, isn't it? The RV takes a turn towards the lateral. Always decide on clockwise or anti-clockwise by looking up at the heart from below. Fine. Imagine you are sitting below the diaphragm and looking up at the heart. So the direction it takes is what it is. So it is clockwise rotation. When that happens and RV takes up the apex, then you find that S1 will not be as loud. These are all the other areas where you must say that S1 is little softened. And other conditions like obesity, emphysema, here all, again, S1 is not going to be as loud. Okay, can we go to the next video?
This is parasternal short axis. A thickened anterior and posterior mitral leaflet with the restricted mobility of the posterior mitral leaflet and the fish mouth appearance of the mitral valve.
Yes, very nicely seen. Fish mouth appearance.
This is a 4-chamber view of the heart, showing all 4 chambers are dilated. And also there is restricted mobility of the posterior mitral leaflet along with the doming of the anterior mitral leaflet, and you can see all both mitral leaflets are thickened, and you can also notice the irregular rhythm of the atrial contraction.
Correct.
This is again a 4-chamber view with color Doppler. Showing the regurgitant jet with mitral regurgitant. For the this is the same picture. The regurgitant jet, I mean, can be used for the quantifying the severity of MR. This is can be based on 2 indexes. One is the volume of the regurgitant jet occupying the LA volume, which is almost 22% in this case. When we can grade as a mild MR in case of regurgitant jet volume occupying less than 20%. 20 to 40% is most moderate MR, and more than 40% is severe MR. The other thing is with the distance of the vena contracta, which is the narrowest region of the regurgitant orifice. So if it is less than 3 mm, it is mild MR. 3 to 7 mm, it is moderate MR, and in case it is more than 7 mm, it is severe MR.
Okay, 1 minute here. We talked about the eccentric jet, if you remember, in case of rheumatic heart disease. Here, because it is following the walls of the chamber, you can make out it is laterally placed. It's very difficult to make out the entire quantum of the regurgitant valve. Okay. It is many a time you underestimate by this methodology, because when it is eccentric, give me a condition where you get more central flow, a type of MR, where you get a more central flow, and where you tend to overestimate the MR. Where else can you get MR, Arvind, besides rheumatic?
I mean, post papillary muscle rupture in case of MI.
Correct. Anywhere else? What are the types of MR you know? Categorize MR.
MR can be because of acute or chronic. Acute is because of primary or secondary. Primary is because of organic lesion or a degenerative lesion. Secondary is because of the ventricular dilatation related changes. So in case of
secondary
chronic,
can be
acute and chronic,
ischemic. Secondary can be ischemic and non-ischemic. Under ischemic is your papillary muscle dysfunction. Non-ischemic is your dilated cardiomyopathy. All right. Okay.
Yes.
Fine. So now you were saying something about acute MR. What is acute MR? Where do you get it?
Can be because of same MI, papillary muscle rupture, and infective endocarditis because of cardiac rupture. Can be because of trauma due to valvular surgery, post mitral valve, valvuloplasty, and can also be because of
trauma,
acute rheumatic fever.
All right, good. So how do you clinically make out acute MR?
I mean, acute MR, there is no LA dilatation. LA chamber is not dilated, so patient, I mean, there won't be an.
What will be the presentation? Patient will go into sudden left heart failure, isn't it? Because the LV is not yet dilated enough to compensate for the increasing flow. So what happens clinically? What are the clinical features? What will happen to the size of the heart? Apex will be?
No enlargement.
So case closed.
Yes, petition is closed. No
The
cause.
file only explains. Sir.
Ma'am?
Yes, apex is normally placed. Then
Yes, ma'am.
what are the other findings? What about the murmur?
Yes, ma'am. The murmur will be not holosystolic. It can be early systolic alone.
So it is an early systolic murmur which stops short
Yes, ma'am.
halfway through. Do you know why that happens?
Yes, ma'am. Because the LA is not dilated, so the LA pressure meets the LA
Good, fine. So there
gradient
is
is
inflation of
shortened.
Yes, yes. Any other findings? Any extra sounds, low pitched or originating from the LV?
Fourth heart sound can be heard, ma'am, because of the normal contraction. Not dilated LA. There can be a fourth heart sound.
Correct, correct. Okay, okay. At the same time, now tell me what is silent MR? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Wherein if you have a
No
severe
murmur.
MR, but you're not able to hear
Yes,
it.
ma'am,
Yes.
no murmur.
Hmm.
Because
Okay. Whenever there is
I'm not
underlying
sure of the
LV
cause.
dysfunction or acute myocardial infarction, you find that what we talked about as secondary MR, right? Those are all very soft and silent MRs. Okay. So they can be either called as annular MR in case of LV dysfunction, or acute MI is a papillary muscle dysfunction. It could be acute or chronic. So here you might have a very silent MR, and here is where you'll find that in the echo, the regurgitant flow will be centrally placed, okay, and overestimated. You can also get silent MR in obese and emphysematous individuals. You must include that also in the answer. So when you separate, your MR as primary and secondary, tell me the MRs which are early systolic phased and the ones which are late or mid. Acute MR is early, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
How about functional annular MR? That's also early. So late and mid will be papillary muscle dysfunction and mitral valve prolapse, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let's go to the next
Yes,
picture,
ma'am.
please. Next
Uh,
slide.
Yes, ma'am. This is an velocity waveform in a four-chamber view at the level of mitral valve. The upward waves are the outflow from the mitral valve, and the downward waves are the regurgitant waves. So, normally in a normal mitral valve, that is during flow across the mitral valve during the diastole. Initially, during early diastole, there is a rapid filling phase. So it has a first peak, which is followed by a diastasis phase. And then during the late diastole, there is an atrial contraction. There is 30% is empty. So usually there are two peaks in an MV pressure volume. But in case of MS, since the flow across the stenotic valve is gradual, the slope of the wave is very gradual, and also as the patient is in AF, there is no significant atrial contraction, so there is no second peak. And based on this waveform, we can calculate the mitral valve pressure gradient, which in this case is the mean pressure gradient is 8.89. So as previously told, like less than 5 is mild MS, and the pressure gradient of 5 to 10 is moderate MS, and more than 10 is severe MS.
Correct. So this, if I might add, this is the area wherein you are using your Doppler to find out the functional assessment in echo. So it's very nicely seen here that the A wave is absent. So we call a technique called pressure half time, wherein we trace this particular graph, and we are able to find out the gradient across the mitral valve along with the annular size as well. You can assess from the gradient. Next slide, please.
This is a similar velocity waveform across the tricuspid valve, and similarly the upward waves or the outflow waves and the negative waves or the regurgitant waves. Based on this, we can help determine the pressure gradient across the tricuspid valve, which is the TRPG. In this case, it is 45.5 millimeters of mercury, which in case of more than 35 is previously said is of moderate pulmonary hypertension. In case more than 50, it's severe pulmonary hypertension.
Yes. Next slide.
This is the parasternal short axis view in M mode at the level of M mode. We can see the LV dysfunction and also the LV systolic diameter. There is enlarged LV, which is more than 4.4 centimeters, and also the EF calculated is 49%. So there is LV dysfunction.
All right. Next slide.
This is also a parasternal long axis with M mode at the level of mitral valve. So these waveforms, what you see, are the movement of the mitral leaflet. These waves usually you can see as there is two peaks as previously described. One is because of venous filling and the other is because of the atrial contraction. Venous filling and the atrial contraction. So, and also there is a reciprocal similar change in the posterior mitral leaflet also. But in our case, the only the wave because of the atrial mitral leaflet is visible, and the posterior mitral leaflet there is no wave because of the restricted mobility. And also there is no peak because of atrial fibrillation. There is no second peak. A wave is lost, and also the slope it is very gradual because of the stimulus.
Yes. All right. So here we get to see the thickened valve along with the valve mechanics, which shows that there is a underlying MS. Okay. Is this the last slide for echo?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So now that you have an idea as to the severity of both the lesions, what is your approach for treatment?
More than mitral valve replacement, mitral valve repair is usually preferred. Ma'am?
Would you want a replacement or repair?
Mitral valve repair is usually preferred rather than mitral valve replacement.
Yes, but then when there are two lesions, an MS along with an MR, do you think a simple plasty will do? Not likely, isn't it? So it has to be a mitral valvular replacement in her case. Do you know when the indication for mitral valvular replacement for either of the two lesions, is it done before the symptoms arise or after?
After the symptomatic phase is class 1 indication for surgery with normal LV function. In asymptomatic stage, if there is there is an increase in the LV function, surgery is indicated. Maybe if there is a normal LV function with likelihood of successful repair, then mitral valve repair is indicated.
Okay, but always we must remember, unless and until patient becomes symptomatic, we must not ever touch the patient surgically. All right, this is the dictum. So once the symptoms arise, then we are allowed to do whichever procedure that we would want. Okay, so with regard to supposing we want to put in a prosthesis, what are the types of prosthesis that you know
of? Mechanical and bioprosthetic.
All right. Give me some features for either. What are the types of bioprosthetic valves that you know of?
Bioprosthesis is porcine and sometimes pericardial xenograph can be used.
Okay, so it can be porcine, bovine, or human, depending on which it is either heterograft or homograft or autograft, isn't it? What is the lifespan of a bioprosthetic valve?
5 to 10 years.
Okay, less than 10 to 15 years, I would say. Whereas for mechanical,
And it's for longer duration, more than 20.
nearly
20.
30 years. Fine. So which one would you choose for whom? Bioprosthesis is
For
for?
like elder patients, I would prefer bioprosthetic valve. For younger patients, mechanical valve. Because of
Alright.
the because of the mechanical valve, you have to start the patient on anticoagulants, and the risk of bleeding in old age is high. So I prefer the mechanical valve for the younger patients, and for elder patients, based on their life expectancy, the bioprosthetic valve would suffice.
Okay, what about pregnant patients?
Bioprosthetic valve.
Yes, because you can't give their anticoagulants there. Okay, do you know some names of some of the mechanical prostheses that are being used?
The tilting disc and the case ball.
Right. So nowadays, which one is being used?
Tilting disc.
Tilting disc, St. Jude's, right? Or there are some which are from Chitra Tirunal also, Citra. Those are being used commonly. So you also must know a word or two about the clicks that are heard, opening click or closing click. Where do you get opening click? Which type of?
In mechanical valve.
Yes, both are in mechanical. The ball and cage variety, the earlier variety, used to have a louder opening click, whereas the present ones will have a better closing click. So on auscultation, you'll be able to hear them.
Yes.
Give me some complications of post-surgical complications, or even otherwise, of these prostheses, mechanical prostheses.
One is anemia due to chronic sequestration. Another one is thrombus formation, clot and dislodgement.
All right. So embolism. Okay. Post-surgical infection leading to dehiscence and an acute MR. Right. That is also one of the significant complications. Okay, Arvind, you did very well. We'll close this, and any of the other faculty would like to ask.
I think I should thank Rohini Madam for the excellent overview on the rheumatic mitral heart disease. I think it's somebody to discuss in detail about the ECG and echo findings in detail and interpreting the value of these investigations when we are discussing the rheumatic mitral valve. It's not much often discussed. And although I joined a little bit late, I could appreciate the efforts taken by the Madam, Rohini Madam, and I should congratulate and appreciate their efforts to teach the students on these finer nuances which are not often discussed. Even if I were happen to discuss this case, I will not go into the ECG and the echo findings and even treatment also sometimes. But Madam has taken pains to discuss all these the nuances, and I congratulate both the Madam and the presenter. Stipriya Madam.
Pardon, sir?
Thank you.
Yeah, Stipriya Madam irukangla.
Yes, sir. Yeah, Dr. Arvind, that was
please.
a very competent presentation on your side. And of course, Dr. Rohini Madam has given deep insights into the entire case presentation. I would like to add just 2-3 points. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Arvind?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Just 2-3 points. One is when you write about the complaints, do not mention P&D and orthopnea in the same line. Do not mention PND and orthopnea in the same line, because you say normally, the patient does not give history of PND and orthopnea, or patient gives history of PND and orthopnea. Both of them cannot occur at the same time. Orthopnea is the patient is unable to sustain the supine position for even few seconds. He's not able to sustain. Whereas in PND, he has to go to sleep in the lying position or mildly propped up position for few hours before he becomes dyspneic. So you can as well say that the patient had episodes of PND and is now progressed to orthopnea. You can put it that way. That's one point. The second thing is when you talk about MR murmur, I would like to know from you how far an MR murmur can be conducted. You said it is conducted to the axilla or radiated to the axilla. How far it can be conducted?
Conducted till back, till the scapular angle.
Yes, it can be conducted. No, not just to the back. It can be conducted across the spine onto the opposite side. Even up to the opposite side of the spine, it can be conducted. That's the second point.
Yes.
The third point in your diagnosis, you have to mention one final point. You said no evidence of infective endocarditis and all that. That's good. But you have to mention that there is no focal neurological deficit, especially with the history of atrial fibrillation. Your diagnosis will be complete only if you mention that there is no focal neurological deficit. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Otherwise, everything is
Well, I did not get your presentation. I was off for some time. Where parasternal E was present or not? Parasternal lift.
Yes.
It was present, is it?
Yes, ma'am.
Was it due to the LA or due to the RV? Now that you know that such a large LA was there, did you look and find out, confirm whether it is because of the LA or because of the RV? You get my point?
Ma'am, yes, ma'am. Ma'am, actually, the he was in both. It was synchronous with the apical impulse and also after the apical impulse, ma'am. So because of both LA enlargement and.
I don't know whether
Yes,
you could answer that way. Whether Rohini madam will clarify on that, because that means there were two types, different sets of pulsations there. One due to RV and one due to LA. That is what you're trying to say. Dr. Arvind, can you hear me?
Ma'am, the LA, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. The one synchronous with the RV was prominent one, ma'am. I mean, synchronous with the apical impulse was the prominent one, ma'am.
So RV hypertrophy
the other one was not
dominant. Okay. RV hypertrophy was dominant. Okay. But I'm not sure whether you could say both. That I have not come across before, but if you have seen, I'm not sure about it. Maybe Dr. Rohini, can you tell?
No, I think it was in synchrony with the apex only. So we will look at it from the RV. The other way to look at it is when you have it because of the LA pushing the RV in front, then it becomes a late systolic lift.
No, he is saying that both sets were there, like LA was also there and RV, but that cannot be.
No, that is not there.
Okay,
I mean, there's one more thing. Is it possible to differentiate between, sometimes there is a confusion. You see, if you get an AS and you get a murmur that is originating from the aortic valve and heard in the mitral area, many a time you confuse between a ejection systolic murmur or a pan-systolic murmur, isn't it, in the apex? How do you differentiate between the two? One is radiation.
Beat to beat variable. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. There is beat to beat variability with murmur of AS.
Yes, yes. If there is atrial fibrillation, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So, in other words, it's called as a post extrasystolic potentiation, right? Which is there only for ejection systolic murmur. Then one more, any dynamic auscultatory features that you can use to differentiate? What is a hand grip?
AS and MR, ma'am.
Yes. How would a hand grip
help? The valvular AS, with the hand grip, the murmur would subside, ma'am. I mean, decrease, ma'am. Intensity would decrease. The valvular AS. In case of MR, the intensity of the murmur will increase with hand grip.
Correct.
Okay, doctor, if the presentation is complete, any other contribution by any other faculty? Dr. Rohini, can we wind up the session?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Yes, with the permission of our HOD, we wind up the session. Yes, doctor. Thank you.
Thank you, Arvind.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, doctor.
Thank you.